They say what gets measured gets improved. So if you're looking to improve your personal finances, one of the first steps you should be taking is to track all of your income and expenses, as well as your assets and liabilities, such as your bank accounts, credit cards, and any outstanding loans you might have. By understanding your finances, you can better understand where you spend your money, create a budget for yourself, and make sure you're on the right track for success. It's never too late to get started, so if you want to get organized, set up a budget, track your income and expenses, and be able to reconcile it to your bank accounts, I'll go over a simple spreadsheet you can build in Google Sheets or Excel to help you track all of this. Now, there are many different apps available that can help you track your finances and even directly connect to your bank account and credit card accounts. You can research those if you're interested, but I found those apps to make things a little bit more complex since I can't customize it to how I want to track, and I'm also not a fan of having sensitive personal financial information connected to an app. Now, I'm sure they have great security and work great, but for our purposes, I'll go over a spreadsheet that I've created, show you how it works, and how you can use it to budget and track your expenses. It's completely free to create a Google account and create a Google Sheet document, or you can use Microsoft Excel if you feel more comfortable with that. But what's great about Google Sheets is that you can download the app on your phone and quickly update or add transactions even if you're not by your computer. I'll first start with showing you how this spreadsheet works with some sample data. Then I'll start from scratch and show you how you can build one yourself. It's a simple spreadsheet, so you don't need to be an Excel wizard, and I'll go through all of the steps you need to take to create the spreadsheet and then maintain it for your own finances. Welcome to CPA Explains. Please note, this is not financial or tax advice. This video is for entertainment and information purposes only. Please contact your attorney or CPA for your tax situation. So let's go ahead and get started. This spreadsheet is broken out into a few different sections. The left side is where you would manually track every transaction that happens. So anytime you buy groceries, gas, pay for rent, or any transaction that happens, you'll want to add a line here. We'll go into detail about what I'm tracking here, but this is the main area that you'll have to maintain within a spreadsheet. The rest of this spreadsheet will be using this data to break out those transactions by account and by category so we can track our bank accounts and see where we're spending our money. On the top right, you'll see a list of all of the bank accounts, credit card accounts, any loans, and basically any account where you might be paying or receiving funds. You can see I've also listed accounts such as my PayPal account and my Venmo account, so I can track those as well. You'll need to input the beginning balances of all of your accounts. And then the rest of this information gets populated using sum-if formulas coming from the transaction listings to the left. So when we're inputting our transactions, we're going to put in what month and what account it relates to, and that way we can break it out here and we can see all of our beginning balances of our accounts and how it changes each month. Right below that, we can also track the categories of our income and expenses. So this data is pulling directly from the transaction list from the left using sum-if formulas. If you're not sure what a sum-if formula is, don't worry because I'll show you how to set it up later in this video. But it's going to help us automate all of this data. As long as we input all of this detail within our transaction listings, we'll be able to see it broken out on the right here. And you can see below this, we've created a pie chart so we can see all of our different categories in a visual chart. So let's go into the transaction listing and see how this works. Each of these different rows are different transactions. Now you'll want to input every transaction that happens. You can do this every day. I like to do it every night before I go to bed. I'll just update this list. But you can do it every other day or every week if you keep track of all of those transactions. Maybe keep a track of them in notes within your phone. Or if you have the Google Sheets app on your phone, you'll be able to open that up and just add those transactions as they happen. You'll need to complete this information for each of the transactions that happens. First, we're going to select what month this transaction happened in. So it's a drop-down list. We can drop this down and select the month. This is going to help us aggregate all of this data by month. Next to that, I have the exact date that this transaction happened on. Then we have a description. You can get as descriptive as you want in this description column. So you can say what company it's for, exactly what you bought, or exactly what happened during this transaction. The next column I have is a category. This again is a drop-down list, and you can create your custom categories. These are the ones that I use, but as we build this, I'll show you how you'll be able to maintain it for your own categories. This again is going to help us aggregate all of our information by month and by category. In the next column, we're going to specify what account this transaction is impacting. So this is a drop-down list, and all of these drop-down lists are associated to what we've built on the right of the spreadsheet, and I'll show you how to build this later on. But you can see here we're going to select exactly where this transaction happened, whether it was from our checking, saving account, or if it was a payment on our credit card, we'll be able to select that here. And then we have our debit and credit columns. I'm not going to go into debits and credits, but essentially these columns are where you would put in the amount that came in or out of the account. So we can see when we paid for our cable or our internet, it was a credit, so money came out of our credit card. But then when we look at a salary transaction, we have money coming into our checking account, and that's a debit. You'll also see some debits on credit card payments. So when you are paying off a credit card, you'll have a credit to your checking account. This would be the account that the money's coming out of. And then you would have a debit to your credit card account as if money's coming into that credit card account to pay it off. And then I have a column called net, which is just a formula taking what's in the debit column minus what's in the credit column to get it into a positive negative format. So essentially it's showing whether it's an income or expense to that account that it's impacting. On the right here, I've listed out all of my accounts. You'll want to go through and just list out any checking, saving, your PayPal, Venmo accounts, any credit card accounts, and just list all of those out here. For each of your accounts, you're going to manually type in the beginning balance at the time you start tracking it. You'll notice in my spreadsheet, I use a blue font anytime I'm manually typing an input, and anytime it's a formula, it's going to be black font. This is just a preference, but it's just something that I do just so I know where I'm typing in an input manually and where a formula is running through to give me that answer. After my beginning balance, you'll see that I'm going to have all of my transactions pull through for the corresponding month. For example, we can see all of the changes that happened to our accounts aggregated in this column for January. And then I can see the ending balances all the way at the end here, and that's going to reconcile to what I actually have in my bank accounts, my credit card accounts, or any other accounts that I've listed here. What you'll also notice is that any of the credit cards or loan payments are in red. Again, this is a preference of mine just to have them in red, and they're also negative amounts. So the balances here are negative, and that just shows that these are payables, they're not assets. These are either credit card accounts or loans where you have a balance, and until you pay that balance off, you're going to have a negative amount. I know some of this can get a little confusing, but hopefully that made sense. The main part here is just to understand that anytime you have a bank account, that would be like an asset account, so you want that to be positive. Or if you have a loan or credit card balance, those would be negative amounts because they are payables. And then below our accounts, we have our income and expenses broken out by categories. When you set up the spreadsheet, you're going to add all of your different categories, and you can have placeholders, so as new categories come up, you'll just have to replace those placeholders. These categories here are coming from our transaction listing, so using our SUMIF formula in each of these columns, we're able to pull these amounts by category and break it out by month. Since I have transactions inputted for January, you'll be able to see those January income and expenses here. What I have to the right of here is also a column for the budget. This would be something that you manually input just to know how much you want to spend each month for these different categories. So you can see here I've set up a budget for myself for how much I spend for my groceries, rent, gas, investments, and then to the right of that it's a formula that's just going to check if we're over or under budget for that month. And right below that, I'm taking all of our expense categories, so the ones that are in red, and I'm going to make those into a pretty pie chart. So I'm using the Google Sheets chart feature here to say which column I want to be the categories and which column I want to be the values to create this type of chart. So as I add my transactions every single day, every time I have a transaction, all of that information will flow into these different sections here and break it out by month so I can see where I'm spending my money and what my account balances look like. if you get into the habit of updating this every single day, you'll really be able to take charge of your finances, know where you're spending money, and where you need to adjust to make sure you're on the right track for your personal finance goals. So now that you see how the spreadsheet works, let's go into this and show you how to build it from scratch. We'll start off by identifying the different type of details we want to track for our transactions. You don't have to follow the same convention as me, so if there's something else you want to track within these transactions, you can add another column. So I'll go ahead and put in the month, date, description, category, account, our debits, credits, and then the net column. Now that we have our headers, below that we would have all of our different transactions. We'll come back so we can build out a sample and show you how to build the drop downs and everything you need to input here. But let's start building out the headers for the other sections of the spreadsheet that we need. So now we'll set up the headers where we're going to list all of our different accounts so we can track the balances by month. So for this section, the first column we'll have is the account. We'll then have the beginning balances. And then we'll have each of our months going from January all the way to December. And then finally having a ending balance column. This ending balance account is going to add up the beginning balance and all of the changes throughout each of the months to get our ending balance. Now that we have the headers for our account section, we can start listing all of the different accounts that we have. So any bank accounts, credit cards, loans, we'll list those out here. So I'm just going to put in a few as an example. Again, don't forget any credit cards or loans are going to be a liability, so they should be in red and should have a negative balance. Now that we have our accounts, we're going to type in our beginning balances, and then we'll come back to set up the formulas for it to pull from the transaction listings later. Below the account section, we're going to leave some space and then put in our headers for our categories. So first we'll have our categories. They're going to be income or expense. And then we'll have our months, so we can track all of the categories by month. I'm going to have a total column, which will add all of our different months across, and then a budget, so we can budget how much we actually wanted to spend for that month. Right next to the budget column, we're going to have a column that's going to tell us if we're over or under budget. We're going to leave some placeholders, so if there's ever any new categories that you want to add, you'll be able to add those to the placeholders. Now that we have our headers set up, we have our accounts listed, we have our categories, we have a good framework to start building out the transaction lists and finalizing the spreadsheet. Let's go back to the transaction listing and start setting up the drop-down menus and set up a sample transaction so we can see how it'll work. So the first thing we're going to do here is set up the drop-down menu so we can choose our month. And to do this, we're going to use the data validation tool within Google Sheets, and the same is also available within Microsoft Excel. So if we come to the data tab here and select the data validation, we'll be able to set up the data validation for this cell. So we're going to select the list here, and then we can choose the cells that we want to use as the list for the drop-down menu. So we already wrote these out as the headers, so I'm just going to select those cells from our account section to be able to use as the drop-downs. Now that just created the drop-down, and now we can see if we click on it, we have a drop-down of all of our different months. The next column we have is the date, and all we have to do here is just format it into a date format. The next column is the description. This is fine, we don't need to do anything here. You're just going to have to type in the description as you have any transactions. The next column is the category. This is going to be another drop-down. And we have a list of our categories that we already put down. So let's go ahead and do the same thing, use the data validation, and select the range that we already have as the list that we want to use for our dropdown. So that creates a dropdown for our categories. We're going to do the same thing for the next column, which is our account. And again, when we go to our data validation, we already have a list of our accounts. So we can just select that range, and now we have a dropdown for all of our different accounts. Column F and G are going to be where you put in the debit or credit amounts of your transaction. So we'll just format this as a number. And then our last column here is going to be our net, which is a formula. We're just going to take our column for our debits minus our column for our credits. And that's going to give us a net amount that we can use to track our balances and our income and expense categories. Now that we have a sample transaction, let's copy this a few times and then use the alternating colors in the format to make it look nice. That completes the transaction listing section, so let's see how we can pull this information in to our accounts and to our categories to the right. I'm going to add some additional transactions here just so we can see how it works when we're tracking it. To be able to aggregate all of our different amounts from our transaction listings by month and by account, we're going to use something called a SUMIFS formula. Now, I'm not going to go into details about writing formulas in Excel, but essentially a SUMIFS is a function that'll sum cells that meet multiple criteria. So in our case, we're going to sum cells that have the same month and the same account within our transaction list. Let's write this formula out for one of our cells, and then we'll drag it across for all of the months and all of our accounts. We'll type in equals SUMIFS, and within the parentheses, we're going to put in the column we want to sum and the criteria we want to match. So the first part of this function, we're going to put in the column that we want to sum, and that's going to be our net column. In the next part of this function, we're going to put in one of the criteria we want to match, and the first one we'll do is the month, so we'll select the month column. So that was the range of the criteria. Now we're actually going to pick the criterion, and that's going to be the cell that we want to match to. We'll select the cell that we want to match to, so we'll pick the cell that says January within the headers of the account section. Now we'll put a comma, and the next range of criteria we want to match to is the account column. So now we'll select the full account column, comma, and then select the cell of the account we want to match to. So that completes the formula for the SUMIFS. So when we press enter, that's going to sum up all of the values from the net column that have the same month and the same account. And what that gives us is the change of our account balance for that month. We'll be able to drag this formula across and down for all of our accounts and for all of the months, but to do that, we'll have to anchor some of the columns and some of the cells that we selected. If you're not sure how anchors work in Excel, I recommend looking into that. I'm just going to add them into the formula and you can follow along, but this is going to make sure our columns and cells don't move when we drag this across and down for all of the columns and rows. If we add the beginning balance and all of the months, at the end we'll have our ending balance. This should tie to what you have within your accounts. You can also check this against your bank statements, but keep in mind sometimes there might be pending payments, so it could be off slightly by a couple of transactions. So in the ending balance column, we're just going to add the beginning balance and then all of the months. We can also create a total cash row, and this is going to give us a total look of how much cash we have minus any of the payables that we need to pay. We can select all of these cells and format it into alternating colors just so we can make it look nice. Now the next section we're going to work on is the categories, and that's going to be really similar to what we did with our accounts, except instead of matching our SUMIFS formula to an account, we're going to match it from the month and to the category. So let's write out this formula. We're going to type in equals SUMIFS, and within the parentheses, we're first going to select the net column again. That's the column we want to sum. And then we're going to select the column that we want to match it to, the criteria range. And that's going to be the month column again. So we want to break this out by month. So we're going to select the month column. And the criterion for this is going to be the cell that has the month in our category section. So we'll pick that cell, comma, the second criteria range, which is going to be the categories. So instead of summing by month and account, this time we're doing by month and category. So we're going to pick the category column, comma, and then we'll pick the cell of the categories that we want to match to. So that'll complete the SUMIFS formula for this one cell. We'll add our anchors to this formula, and then we can drag it across for all of our months, and then drag it down for all of our rows. As we add our different months and we continue our transaction list, all of this will get populated and you'll be able to see a full picture of what you spent on each category at each month. At the end, we can do a total column and then sum up all of our months together, and that'll give us our annual income or expenses. We have a row for our budget. That's our monthly budget. So I would put in what I estimate my budget to be for each of these categories. So you can type in your estimates. You should be able to estimate some of these things pretty accurately, such as your rent, your car payment, maybe your salary. And in the next column over, we'll be able to compare this to what you have for each of the months. So this formula is going to take the value in each of the months and minus it by the budget. You'll have to configure this formula each month. So when we come to February, you're going to come in here and change that to the February month so you can track that. And there are ways to automate the months here. So if you can figure that out, do it, and maybe let us know in the comments below how you figured that out. Below this, I'm going to add a total row as well, so I can see my total expenses and what I budgeted. Now the last thing we're going to do is build a pie chart so we can break out our expenses and be able to see that in a visual format. To do that, I'm going to insert a chart, and then I'll change the type to a pie chart. And then we have to select the data range for the values and the labels. So we'll select the cells that have our labels, which are our categories, and I'm only going to select the expense categories. You don't want to add the salary or any income categories within the pie chart because that'll skew things a bit. So you just want to look at income separately and then expenses separately. So I'll just select the expenses categories, and then I'll add another data range, and this time we'll select the values for those same categories. We're going to combine these ranges horizontally and then pick the J column in our scenario as the labels and then the L column as the value. So now you can see that builds out a nice pie chart. It breaks it out by the percentage of the total of the cells that we picked and puts it in a nice visual format. So now you can see where you're really spending most of your money, and hopefully you can track this month by month and be able to control it and make sure you're on track to meet your financial goals. So that sums up this video. Hopefully that was helpful. I know we went through a lot, so you can rewatch this video for any parts you didn't understand. Give me a like if you thought it was helpful, and subscribe. Thank you.